Hey, this is John Fernay, the co-host of the Maryland Crabs, and I am here today with a Maryland Crabcake for your listening pleasure. What's a crabcake? It's not quite a full episode, it's just a little snippet. Stay tuned and check it out. And make sure you check us out on themarylandcrabs.com. You can follow us on Twitter at MDCrabsPodcast or find us on Facebook at the Maryland Crabs Podcast. And don't forget, subscribe, rate us, iTunes. Go there now. Hey, this is John Fernay with the Maryland Crabcake for the Annapolis Film Festival. The Annapolis Film Festival opens on Thursday, March 30th and runs through Sunday, April 2nd in Annapolis, Maryland. Before the West Coast will make its Annapolis debut on Friday, March 31st at 2:30 p.m. in the Lower Theater at Maryland Hall, and again at 3 p.m. on Saturday, April 1st at Asbury United Methodist Church. Tickets and passes are available at AnnapolisFilmFestival.com. And to learn more about Before the West Coast, head over to BeforeTheWestCoast.com or check them out on Facebook. And today, we're with Oid Craddock, who is not only the producer, writer, director of Before the West Coast, but you played for Coach Otis Washington, who is the focal point of this film during that magical season in 1975. Welcome, Oid. How are you?
Good morning, John. It's great to be here with you.
It is. How's the weather down there in Atlanta? We're up here in Maryland, and they were expecting some kind of a crazy blizzard here today, and all we've got is a bunch of slush.
It's just a little damp and cool here, but nothing compared to what our friends in the Northeast are facing. So we're pretty.
Well, for people that are listening, the Before the West Coast, it's a civil rights story set in Louisiana. In 1967, there was a federal ruling that said St. Augustine, or St. Aug, which was an all-black high school, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was an all-black high school, was allowed to join the all-white Catholic League in athletics. It's a story of adversity, overt racism, struggles, and ultimately victory as you guys marched on to a state championship in 75 with an undefeated 15-0 season. Do I have that kind of right?
Yes, you do.
Well, that's that's amazing. I mean, I've watched the trailer, I've read many of the synopses, and this is one of the big ones that I must see when the film festival rolls down a little bit later on this month. You did send me the full version that I could watch on my computer or my television, but I prefer to see movies that I've never seen before on the big screen, and that's just my own thing. Just one question that I do have as I read about it is, Before the West Coast, where did the title come from?
Well, it's really twofold, John. Number one, you mentioned Coach Otis Washington, and he was a great leader as a coach, but also an innovator. And he developed an offense that had concepts of the West Coast offense that became very popular in the late 70s and 80s in the professional game, and it's still used today. So the time that we played and when he became head coach, he was using some of those concepts before the West Coast, but also the period in time as well. The late 60s and 70s was a great period of change, not only in New Orleans and Louisiana, but our country as it relates to race relations. And so
without a doubt.
It's a reflection of the time as well as the sports element. So before the West Coast. Okay,
well there you tried my sports knowledge there, which I admit is not nearly as good as it possibly should be. But I mean, what was the impetus behind this film? Okay, you obviously you lived. I mean, you lived this film. This is a story of a period of your life, as well as obviously a bunch of other folks that shared your life with you. You know, we spoke a little bit earlier before the interview. I mean, you're a little bit older than I am, and so I mean, you've gone so long. What was the impetus? Why did all of a sudden this particular period of your life, these I'm going to guess 4 or 5 years, because you came. When did you go into the school? They became part of the league in '67, and you entered the picture in '71, and then
actually I was a freshman in high school in the fall of 1972. Graduated in 76. Now, as a kid, I knew about St. Augustine High School. I watched its progress, its journey, what it meant to the black community as a unique school, an all boys a black all-boys Catholic school, which was unique at that time in the country, high school that is. And then what it represented as far as being groundbreaking in terms of race relations, not only in sports, football, but basketball. Early on, it challenged the racial barriers, had a secret game, if you will, with an all-white champion team. The marching band broke the barriers of being the first band to march in an all-white parade, the King of Carnival, Rex Parade, so many areas.
Right.
I'm a child of the 60s, a teenager of the 70s, and of course entered the workforce in the 80s. And so I watched St. Augustine growing up, and it had a huge impact on my life.
Why now? Why, as you're in your 50s, to sit there and say, I need to make this into a film?
Well, it was a sequence of things that kind of came together. Number one, at the end of 2011, I was retiring from a 31-year career with the IBM Corporation. I was in
now, there's a surprise for me. Okay, we'll get back to that. I want to talk to you about that. And in January of 2012, really only a few weeks after my retirement, where I was doing a number of things, reflecting in many ways, Coach Otis Washington was inducted into the Louisiana High School Athletic Association Hall of Fame, the LHSAA as it was called. And so that was huge. He really was deserving to many of us to have been an inductee many, many years before 2012, but it had finally happened. And attending that event, seeing him, seeing old teammates, seeing some old photographs, it just brought back not only memories of the great football experience, but also of that time in the city of New Orleans and what St. Augustine meant to the city of New Orleans, which was a very, very segregated city in the Deep South until that period of time. And St. Aug broke barriers and led the community in many ways. So it was really the induction of Coach Washington in 2012, which is when I started the documentary. That was the catalyst. Great. Well, I'll tell you, New Orleans must have done something right, because I wasn't obviously back there in the 70s or even the 80s. I fell in love with that city probably in the early 90s and traveled there often. And I have to say that it is hands down one of the most friendly cities. Also, it's one of the most integrated cities. And I don't see a whole lot of outward, overt racism there, which is just a wonderful thing, and it's a welcoming thing. I love to take my kids when they were younger down there, and I've often threatened to retire down there too, but I just got to get over that whole August heat stuff there.
I know it's rough,
but it's a wonderful thing there. Now, you said you had a career with IBM. Now, I know that you were an Hall of Fame football player for Southern Illinois University after you graduated from St. Aug. Why not the NFL? Why IBM? How did that happen? and then I guess my follow-up question is, okay, so how do you go from working for Big Blue into making films?
You got quite a bit wrapped into those series of questions. Well, number one, I didn't get drafted. That's probably a function of size and speed and those kinds of things. I was a very good football player. Maybe not a great athlete, but a very good football player, very productive. And honestly, I really, while I enjoyed the game and really never really fully defined myself by my football accomplishments, it was really my overall achievements. I prided myself being an honor student in high school, made the dean's list a few times in college, and honestly had a family early. My wife and our daughter was born when we were in college, and I was intent on being a leader of a family, being a father. So when I didn't get drafted, IBM wanted me on their team. I joined the IBM team, and the rest, as you say, is history. So that's
I've got to say, in probably 1980, that was probably a really good move.
Well, they were number one. IBM, when I joined IBM, they were 3 years running Fortune 500 top company, in the world. my first 3 years there. So I knew it was a great organization, and like I said, it was more important for me to be independent, be a man, and lead a family than to chase the dream. So, and I realized my odds would be challenging not being drafted, but it was hard. It was hard not to take that next step, but it turned out well.
Absolutely. Now, how do we go from IBM into writing, directing, and producing films?
Well, this is the first, and
you dove into the deep end there, man. You didn't start with any of the small stuff.
Didn't really intend to make a documentary. When I said the meeting of Coach Washington at the Hall of Fame induction was the catalyst, it was really a catalyst to produce a great photo catalog with a couple of video clips that really talked about that time and talked about St. Augustine football. That really was the intent. But when I interviewed some of my teammates and players that played before me, and I asked them some probing questions on what it was like to play for the school at that time, to play for Coach Washington, what it meant. And the story came out about that time in our city, that time in our lives, what the school meant to the community, and some of the challenges, the adversity that we faced during those years from the racial climate. All of that surfaced, and so I knew that was a bigger story that had to be told, and so it evolved. I just felt compelled to tell that story. I wanted this country of ours to know about what St. Augustine contributed to the city and the state, and really even to this country in terms of our graduates, what they've gone out to do, and of course the great football that was played. And the great contribution of Otis Washington. He was an outstanding coach and excelled. And he was ahead of his time. So I wanted this country to know that. And that's what led to the story. I put a team together. My director of photography, my editor, my visual effects, and they all turned out to be people that I knew or were related to who had skills in that arena. And the team gelled. I knew the story I wanted to tell. I knew the football. They had the artistic talent, and it all came together.
Now, you'd mentioned talking with some of your former teammates and some of the players that perhaps came before you in this. Without giving away any secrets out of the film, but what types of overt racism and challenges did you face on the field?
Well, first of all, on the field, as you know, there's all kinds of talk that goes on among players when they're competing. Even today, they call it trash talking. Well,
certainly.
You can imagine what the talking might have been like during those times when, there was a great separation between the races and a feeling by the white race, quite frankly, that we were inferior. And so there was that kind of talk. But the discriminatory officiating, it was terrible, especially the early years, first 5, 6, 7 years. The story takes place over a 13-year period, by the way. And there are some facts that are presented in the documentary to support the disparity in the officiating. We had multiple unfavorable rulings by the high school association. And by the way, you mentioned earlier that we integrated the Catholic League. It was more than the Catholic League. The Catholic League was only one district in the entire state. We integrated the entire state. The high school association that governed all the sports in the state, all of the white schools, that was the league that we integrated. And and our doing that opened the door for other black schools to come in and compete, or public schools, the non-Catholic schools to compete. But so we had multiple unfavorable rulings. 19 of our players were declared ineligible our first year due to a technicality on what instructional materials were used with the course. A few years later, we had an undefeated team disqualified because of an administrative error associated with a guy's transcript. So you had all of those things happen year after year, and we had to continue to fight through it. Then you just have misfortune, you know.
Well, one thing I've got to say is I did a little bit of, sniffing around on between your website and Coach Washington. How many years did he coach there for?
Coach Washington, he was head coach 11 years. I think he did another 5 years with the junior varsity.
Okay, so he's got 16 years there, and you said this story spans 13. And I did see a fact that Coach Washington, despite all of this adversity, despite the unfair rulings, despite everything they're throwing in your way to not compete against white competitors, amassed an 87% winning rate.
It's a fact. 113 victories, 17 losses, and 1 tie. It was amazing. Something truly special had to be going on to achieve at that level under the circumstances.
Well, it certainly is, and I'll tell you, this is one film that if you're going to the Annapolis Film Festival at the end of the month that you do want to see. You do have 2 chances to see it. Before the West Coast will make its Annapolis debut on Friday, March 31st at 2:30 in the Lower Theater at Maryland Hall, and again at 3 p.m. on Saturday, April 1st at Asbury United Methodist Church there. Are you going to be coming up for the festival? Boyd, do you know?
I will be there for the entire event. I will conduct Q&As after the screening, both days.
That is phenomenal. Is there anybody else that's associated with the film coming up, do you know? Or is it just you?
No one else is coming at this time.
Okay, well, what I will do is I will make sure that I hunt you down and introduce myself to you face-to-face. I do appreciate your time with me this morning, and we'll get this going, sending this over to the Annapolis Film Festival. We'll have sort of a preview of the previews. Again, the Annapolis Film Festival opens on Thursday, March 30th, runs through Sunday, April 2nd in Annapolis, Maryland. Before the West Coast, March 31st, Friday at 2:30 in the Lower Theater at Maryland Hall, and again at 3 p.m. on Saturday the 1st at Asbury United Methodist Church. Tickets for the film festival and passes are available at AnnapolisFilmFestival.com. And to learn more about Boyd Craddock and Before the West Coast, head over to BeforeTheWestCoast.com or check him out on Facebook. And when you're down here at the film festival, make sure you check this movie out. This is a good one. Boyd, thank you very, very much for your time, and I look forward to meeting you in a couple weeks.
It was my pleasure, John. Look forward to seeing you. Take care.